Vivienne, good to see you again. Thank you for making a bit of time to come and have a chat about your new book. I really appreciate you making the time to come talk because I know you've been busy promoting it and all the rest of it. So thank you for taking some time. So you've written this great book called Robot Proof. I mean, just give people that perhaps haven't come across it, give people a flavour of what the book's about, and then we'll dig into some of the issues involved in a second.
Well, I have to say, Robot Proof, I have some sympathy for my publisher who were confronted with what is the category of this book? How are we
Yeah.
supposed to market this? And I'm proud. I It has charted on the Amazon's lists for computer science, self-help, AI, and I loved this category, psychology and humor. If you've read the book, you will understand why that latter term. So, uh, but for me, I have spent nearly now 30 years as an academic, as an entrepreneur, as a bit of a philanthropist, working with machine learning and artificial intelligence. For the sake of the wonks that care about terminology, AI to me is a product term. Underneath any modern AI is often dozens of different kinds of machine learning models. But that's just for the nerds if you really want to get into it. So I'm going to use the term AI just for simplicity's sake. And for me, this book was an exploration not of what AI is. Lots of books about what
Yeah,
AI is.
yeah, yeah.
Some of them, amazingly enough, are not even wrong, which is a huge win in any discussion about machine learning. So, for me, this was a book about what happens when humans and machines interact. And I've had this completely dumb luck career that has been at that interface from the start. I'm a computational neuroscientist and psychologist by training, a experimental psychologist. Um, And after I stepped away from being a full-time academic at UC Berkeley, I started companies using AI in education and AI in workforce and AI in health and neuroscience. And then I just found that what I really loved was just solving any kind of a problem that was about humans. So people would bring me stories of sick kids or challenges inside companies or countries. And mainly, not that I'm a one-trick pony, but inevitably there was some kind of AI involved in solving that problem. If a problem was solvable, because sometimes messy, complex problems that come to someone like me really aren't solvable, but understanding why was valuable. So what I felt was missing was not per se a business book about what leaders should do, but yes, I have chapters about that. Not a parenting book about people worried about their kids, but absolutely, I have multiple chapters about that. It wasn't even just a dumb bunch of war stories of us. I will say with some self-congratulation, I think some pretty good war stories of doing things I believe everyone would find valuable with AI, like working about diabetes and Alzheimer's and with orphan refugees. It was all of those things because what I wanted to explore is how does artificial intelligence make us better? Literally in concrete measurable terms. I'm a hard number scientist, but also how does it hurt us and undermine us? Because it turns out the story that I tried to tell, and I hope it came across, is it can do both and it does do both. Uh, and anyone that wants to truly make progress in AI, in business, in your personal life, in social policy, has to recognize both are true
Yeah.
and really start to make choices about how do we maximize true human value gain.
Yeah.
Um,
Can
and
I just,
that ended up being what the book was about.
okay, and I mean, the premise of the title, Robot Proof. suggests that we need to worry about AI. We need to worry about the robots. I mean, just give us a flavor of to what extent that premise is true. And we'll talk in a second about the practical stuff that people perhaps need to start to do in relation to some of the challenges
Absolutely.
AI brings.
So let me preface this way. I am an AI realist. AI isn't a magic wand. It's not a genie that's going
Mm.
to wish away all disease and discover everything that we ever wanted to understand, despite what Sam Altman wants to sell you. AI isn't going to destroy the world. I am genuinely worried about autonomous weapons, but we haven't invented Skynet or anything remotely like that. If you're scared about I suspect what you're really scared about is other people,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of with you on that. So, what I care about is in real measurable terms, from a person using it to a company to a society, how does AI change outcomes? So, when I say robot proof, what I'm really looking at is if you're like me and you actually kind of love AI, what it can do. I'm a sci fi nerd. So, for me, AI is Buck Rogers and Star Wars and 2001. It's a little scary, it's a little wonderful. But then when I get introduced to it as a student, the real AI in the world, and I saw, wow, if you work really hard and you study a problem differently, AI can't solve that problem for you, but if you can figure out a solution, it can scale that solution. It can change the economics of that problem and really transform it. But the human at the center of that exploration is the transformative part of that.
Mm.
And they're sort of two together. So, robot proof isn't don't use AI. In fact, a piece of advice I've been hearing a lot recently has been take like AI breaks. It's like for social
Right.
media, take a
Yeah.
little social media holiday. No, now you're signing up for the idea that this is a vice and you shouldn't be using it.
Mm.
Yeah, if you're spending all of your time engaged in AI generated porn, then you're probably not using your time very well. Please don't do that. When I run my experiments and I watch people interact with I see three broad patterns. I see one group that we call automators who totally check out. Literally, as we monitor brain activity, the neural signature of cognitive effort just drops from
Yeah.
thinking hard to watching TV, and they simply ask the AI for the right answer to whatever problem they're working on,
Yeah.
and they submit it as though they were on. And that is far and away the largest population that I see. Are all people
That's
doing
a
that all the
problem.
time? No, but
And that's
yeah,
a problem, isn't it? So let's come back to that in a second. So talk about the other two because I want to come back to the problem that you've just identified. Talk
absolutely.
about
So
the other two.
we'll set it up here
Yeah.
and we'll wrap around. So that is when I'm worried about AI, that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about it undermining people, and we can go into detail because there's a lot of research beyond mine on that population. The next largest group we call validators. They think, they genuinely put the effort in, and then they say, GPT, Gemini, DeepSeek, here's what I believe. Give me as many reasons as possible why I am the world's greatest genius, and I was right about everything all along. Um, and boy, these models are happy to tell you what a genius you are and validate everything you believe. So, paradoxically, despite thinking a lot more than my automators, these validators actually do worse than AI alone on most of the tasks that we observe them in.
Right.
So that's sort of disappointing because they're using it and they're thinking, but they're using it to confirm their own biases. They're
Yeah.
leaning into bad ideas. They hide their own misconceptions from themselves. And AI is happy to help because the way we train these models, it's always happy. and almost also simultaneously never happy because it completely lacks such a capability. Our final group, this is the robot proof group, if you will. Um, I call them cyborgs because, again, I'm a sci-fi nerd, but it wasn't my term originally. This was a group of researchers out of Harvard that did this term originally, studying BCG consultants using GPT.
Right.
The interesting thing about the cyborgs and why I think that's a good term for them is the result of that mixing human natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. Put it together, and I call that hybrid intelligence.
Right.
In my automators, hybrid intelligence is basically just artificial intelligence. The humans have checked out. And my validators, it's sublinear, like it's less than
Yeah.
either of them alone. In my cyborgs, it's more than either of them alone. In other words, it's inseparable, it's emergent. The intelligence of our cyborgs, they come to conclusions that neither the human nor the AI would have reached on their own. And it's better than what either of them do on their own
Right.
on average. So when I'm looking at this concept of robot proof, I'm doing it through the lens of an AI realist. I love AI. Its ability to do medical diagnostics, to find flaws in contracts, to do a lot of amazing things at next to no cost is a true value gain in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
world.
Can,
If humans, and we'll take the time to go through a lot of technical and really advisory detail here, if humans are still deeply inexorably a part of this, and that doesn't mean the AI does the boring work and the humans do
yeah.
the decision making or human in the loop or any Hallmark card version of that idea. Again, the emergent property of hybrid intelligence is the humans and the machines are doing the boring work together. They're doing the creative work together. It is inseparable.
And
Here's the final part, though. We only see that in single digit percentages of the population.
yeah.
That's why I'm scared.
Yeah. So just to illustrate that point about the hybrid intelligence, because I think that's a really interesting area. I mean, it's the most exciting bit. There's another bit that's much more scary, but that's the exciting bit, it seems to me. In a practical sense, just describe an example of how a cyborg is kind of using the hybrid intelligence. I mean, how might that work on a practical task? I mean, just give us an
Yeah,
example of how that
so
might work.
we gave a group of experimental participants starting last summer a very practical task, one that's getting now used to be hundreds, now billions of dollars of interest, which is prediction markets.
Yeah.
So we had a set initially of UC Berkeley students, but then general population as well, make predictions about the future. And the questions were taken off of the prediction market called Polymarket, which
Yeah.
nowadays more people will have heard of, but back then was a little less well known. So let's ignore Polymarket is full of how many times will Elon Musk tweet in the next week, or will Arsenal win the Premier League this year? And I'm not interested in any of that. I want to look at things of some real human meaning. What will the price of oil be in 6 months? Will there be a new front in Western Ukraine?
Yeah.
Will there be instability in Uganda? So these questions. And when I gave them to even my very bright UC Berkeley students, but are non-expert in these questions, and they have an hour and they have to make 10 predictions, they're terrible at this. They don't know.
Mm.
They don't know what the price of oil is today, much less 6 months from now. Needless to say, who could have predicted the price today, 6 months
Yeah.
ago? Um, and so they're terrible at this. Then I had, at the time, Gemini 3, which was the state of the art model,
Yeah.
and whatever GPT version was at the top at that point. And then two open source, small open source model, a Guaran model and a Llama model. So these are small things you could arguably run on your phone. The worst open source model still did better than the best human being.
Right.
So if you were just looking to replace people, there's your evidence. These things are predicting the future. What did they do? They largely just took the existing trends and extrapolated to 6 months from now. So while they were better than humans, they were still substantially worse than Polymarket itself, which is why I took the questions from Polymarket, because then I could compare
Yeah.
its predictions to that day. What was the distribution of bets on Polymarket? Much less what the ultimate resolution was. So there's our ground truth for natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. And among the models, benchmarks predicts everything. The better the model did on the standard benchmarks, the better its predictions were. Then the hybrid intelligence. Well, I've already given you the answer here. The vast majority of participants simply ask whatever model they're using for the answer and submit it as their own. And then the next largest group come up with their own prediction, but rather than challenging it or exploring, they just ask the AI to why they were right. But then our cyborgs, and here's where I'll get a little bit more detail. What was interesting about them is their first step was, here's my prediction. So some classic ideation. And then the model, but what they say is, model, why is it wrong? What am I not thinking about? And the model would say, the data, kind of what the models were doing on their own. Here's the trend from the data. And the humans would say, that's interesting. So I'm wrong about this, but what about this? So the humans, our cyborgs, would keep exploring, and the models would keep pulling to the data. And as I've already alluded to, the cool net result of that sort of cyclical little process there was, after not that many, like 3 or 4 rounds of that process, they'd submit an answer, and it was better than the best models. It was better than the best humans, obviously, but even though our hybrid cyborg teams were different than Polymarket, on average, their answers were statistically almost the same as Polymarket. So in other words, experts with money on the line, millions of dollars on the line, and our cyborgs in 1 hour with no prior knowledge were doing nearly as well as them. And on certain kinds of questions, better. Questions with like long tails or sort of political implications that might cause people to be biased, our cyborgs did better at. But that description of that process, the humans would explore. I don't think this is the right answer, but what about this? Why isn't this affecting the price of oil? And the machine would provide them insights and answers. And what's interesting is when we looked at the factors that were predictive of hybrid intelligence, it wasn't the AI benchmarks. Yeah, the teams using a state-of-the-art model did a little bit better, but not dramatically better. Even the teams using the worst open source model were nearly as good. They were nearly as good as Polymarket. They were still better than the best AIs. So some uninformed humans with an open source model did better than a state-of-the-art model. Um, what was predictive of hybrid intelligence? Human factors, human capital. So fluid intelligence, curiosity, intellectual humility, and I sort of love this because it's a social skill, but perspective taking, your ability to understand other people and their motivations. So each of these was assessed beforehand and be an independent assessment. But practically speaking, as you watch it, we analyze the transcripts. Fluid intelligence is about kind of your ability to deal with a shifting, complex problem, and discover a way of solving it. So that's obviously applicable here, but curiosity. If the AI gave you an answer, did you keep looking for a better one? Intellectual humility. Did you ask the AI to prove you wrong?
Mm.
If it said you were wrong, did the most common thing was either to ignore that or to just totally collapse and then do whatever else it said. You see that in doctors, for example.
Yeah.
They do one or the other, but not in the middle. But the people that scored high in intellectual humility, once they got feedback that they were wrong, they integrated that, but they kept exploring. And then, I mean, the perspective taking on some level is kind of straightforward, right? When you're co-working with a human or an AI, your ability to understand what it's saying to you and what it means is really powerful. When I work with my grad students who are brilliant, um, I still understand that their brilliance doesn't mean that they are right about things or that I'm right about things. Maybe we just misunderstood each other.
Mm.
And there's like almost a little spidey sense of, I think we're out of sync right now. This is something we need to dive deeper on because otherwise we're going to really regret it later. And we could see that in the transcripts where people would say, no, I think you misunderstood what I said. You gave a different answer than I was expecting. So these are the things we saw very practically and the human factors that were predictive of
So,
this sort of hybrid intelligence.
yeah. So give us, I mean, for the people watching, I mean, give us some very simple advice. If you want to be a cyborg, if you want to develop that hybrid intelligence, if that's the thing that is appealing that you think makes sense, I mean, give us a couple of practical steps that you can take. I mean, I've got a couple of things going through my mind, but what would you
Yeah,
suggest somebody
so
should
I
do?
mean, I took some time in my book to separate out the advice for sort of different groups. So, what you might do as a parent or an educator working with the next generation, what you might do for yourself, and then kind of a distinct set of advice for what you might do if you led an organization. Because I think that's one of the most challenging spaces. But let's start for yourself. And this is one I literally used to work on my book. And it will connect to what I said about intellectual humility. I never let Gemini write anything in my book. I don't actually like Gemini's writing very well. Claude is a better AI writer, and even that I'm not thrilled with. Um, so, out of arrogance, I certainly wouldn't let it write. But I also know the research. If you let it write, you don't remember what it says, even if they were notionally your ideas. You feel less ownership of it. And again, there's a kind of this cognitive surrender process going on. So what I did was the exact opposite. I would write a chapter of the book, and then I would go to Gemini and I would say, "You are my nemesis, my lifelong enemy. You found every mistake I've ever made and pointed out to the world. Here's the new draft of a chapter for my new book. Tell me everywhere that I'm wrong and explain me in detail how to fix it." So I didn't use AI to make my work easier. This whole pitch that AI is about efficiency and productivity in a sort of shallow sense. I used AI to make my work harder,
Yeah.
but in the ways that made me better. And I think ironically, it actually sped things up for me because I could quickly get someone that's not super social and I don't spend a lot of time other than bizarrely on stages interacting with people. I can get a little trapped in my own head on these problems.
Right.
Getting a loyal opposition to tell me, nah, this is wrong and this is wrong. And what's nice is then I could come right back and say, you know what? Now you're my next bored audience that just doesn't know why any of this is relevant to them. Um, what is missing to make this feel like it connects for them? So I would spin out prompts for these agentic AIs that would really challenge me to do something better. Find me counterexamples that I should reference or be able to explain in my material. Not that a book like this is meant to be packed with scientific references, but it's important to me to
Yes.
know that I'm not just lost in my own head. So that's a really concrete one. An interesting one that I actually started doing with my kids, but then I started doing is I have Claude review my interactions with Claude and with Gemini and surface so at the end of the week, go back, find every time I let AI do my own thinking for me. Um, and find every time I got good feedback and I ignored it. And so I have this running diagnostic. Really, initially, I just was worried that my kids would slip into this automator mode. The answers are so easy. You don't want to think about every problem, but how do we make certain you're not over relying on it? And I thought, well, let's fight fire with fire, which is capture and summarize my mistakes. And it really worked for my kids. And I thought, well, Jesus, then I should start doing this too. Um, One last little example, and it's not about agentic AI, but I have it in the book as a fairly concrete example because I've gotten a lot of pushback from people saying, people said the same thing about the printing press. I never said such the same thing about the printing press, clearly made people more intelligent, put a handful of people making illuminated manuscripts out of work and spread literacy throughout Europe and then the rest of the world. What is a technology changing? Not simply that it exists. What does it change? Printing press made everything better. Calculator took away something humans are never particularly good at, complex sums, and why memorize a logarithm table when it can do it instantaneously?
Yeah.
Mathematical reasoning, that's a thing to be preserved. And the calculator doesn't affect that. But there is a technology which is unambiguously artificial intelligence, and we already have the measured evidence that it is affecting our cognition, and that is GPS and automated navigation. Um, and it's truly, I mean, a new paper just came out this year showing that taxi and ambulance drivers have the lowest rates of Alzheimer's of all job categories, but not bus drivers because they drive a route. They don't have to think
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
now none of us have to think about it. So my advice here is pretty simple. Um, you want to use Google Maps? 100%. I just used it in Asuncion. I've never been to Paraguay before. How would I know how to get around? But what I challenge myself is to look at the map, get the advice. Now, the one thing you can't do is take that advice. You have to get to the same place, but think about a different route. How do you think you could get there faster,
it's
given what you know?
interesting. It's interesting you said that. I mean, I'm a mountaineer, and I mean, on a number of occasions, I've come across people out in the hills. I can think of one example, particularly when I was climbing up in North Wales, actually, and using their mobile phone to get around in the mountains, which really is not a good idea, especially when the battery runs out. But your basic point is there's value in learning to read maps, isn't there? Rather than just pressing a button and saying what's the route. That's what you're really saying, isn't
Yeah, I
it?
mean,
Use your brain to learn a skill is incredibly
there's a
valuable.
weird tension here, which someone could mistakenly think that what I'm saying is you don't have to know how to do things, machines will do things, and you just
Mm.
need these sort of vague, squishy skills. Actually, the sad story is you still need to know how to do things.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
reason I'm good at what I do is I know how to do things, but it changes kind of the underlying why, which is I need to know why I need to factorize this polynomial. But a machine will probably do the factorizing.
yeah,
Long before LLMs
yeah.
came along,
So, so
tools like Mathematica did all that. So you still need to learn things, but it turns out it's not the knowing these traditional skills that are actually predictive either of success with AI or for that matter of long-term life outcomes. What makes them predictive is you have that underlying
yeah.
rich human capital.
One of the categories you mentioned was about leadership and their
Yeah.
use of AI. And you talked about that being a particularly difficult, I mean, sort of set of circumstances. I mean, just illustrate what leaders should be doing with AI, thinking about with AI, and just give us a flavour of that, your thinking around that?
I mean, I think one of the challenges to leaders, there's two main ones. One of just is just in the moment. You're getting sold these tools. Um, they seem like they can do so much, but you're probably also hearing that nobody's seeing any benefits from them,
Mm.
which kind of have a conversation with Claude and then tell me there's nothing there. It is amazing what it can do. I just recently I was reading a paper about a new discovery in superposition and in the mathematics of quantum mechanics, which is a little beyond me, it turned out. Um, and it used this term Shannon von Neumann information. And I thought, what? I've never heard of von Neumann information. What is this? And so I had an extended conversation with Claude about that. And I feel like for the first time, I really get quantum computing now.
Wow.
Um, and in theory, I could have done that on my own. I could have gone and read a bunch of books. But honestly, it took me about 30 minutes going back and forth. I understand the math of information theory. I use it a lot in my work. Starting from there, walk me through the parallels between wave packets and probability and all. And genuinely, it was truly eye-opening. There is something there. I use this in so much of my work, not just LLMs, but reinforcement learning and deep models. And again, when you interact with an agentic AI, there are dozens of different models under the hoods that it's making use of. But that experience, it's amazing. How is it we're not seeing any benefits? Well, one is because you're getting sold the idea that, again, this is all about efficiency. AI will do all the boring work.
Mm.
And then your humans can focus on the creative work. Again, this is not what we see in our cyborgs. Our cyborgs, when they were looking at the price of oil, they would get into the weeds with the AI. What are the trends? What is the data saying? Think of a financial analyst. If you watch someone analyzing a spreadsheet, you and they're using GPT, almost everyone will have the AI analyze the spreadsheet and then starting from its answers, prepare whatever it is they're working on, their analysis, but it turns out that really underperforms. If you did look at the spreadsheet yourself, you don't really understand the
Yeah.
data. You're missing the points where the model is extrapolating wrong or the interesting nuances. So again, there our cyborgs are using AI to they're there with it, right? Like it's inextricable. The cognitive process is both the natural and the artificial of producing this novel thing. So, one problem for leaders is you're being sold one thing, and then a jerk like me is showing up and saying, that's not actually the value proposition.
Right.
And not just me, others are finding like a new large scale analysis of hundreds of thousands of working developers found that the vast majority of developers don't show any benefits from using code assistance tools. Only the most elite developers do. And they see real sustainable benefits. So again, if you're just thinking of it, it'll do all the boring work and you work and you're taking the advice of the companies selling you these tools, then you're seeing no benefits because that's not where the benefits lie.
And
Um,
just to make sure I've got this right, so what you're basically saying is that AI is a thinking partner. It's not something that you can delegate tasks to. It's a partner to think with. Is that a fair summary?
it's a fair summary, although I'm going to say we see a bifurcation. If you want to think about AI as an army of robotic minions to carry out your orders, that is not unreasonable. Uh, and it will reduce costs and
Yeah,
it'll
yeah,
produce results. I simply see one that it's a dead end. Um, all of its answers are also in the pockets of every one of your competitors, whether that competitor is a coworker competing for a promotion or your competitor across the street or around the world. And in fact, your real competitor in the end is whoever's selling you that technology because they own the general use tool that's solving all of your problems. Why won't they just start to eat your business in the
Yeah.
long run?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Certainly in China, that's the process we slowly see. Um, but so I'm not saying companies aren't going that way. In fact, I think companies are going that way, and they'll probably see cost reductions. So that becomes really seductive. Similar performance, reduce costs.
Mm.
Why not? I'm just saying if you were expecting things to qualitatively change for the better, it's only in this other hybrid intelligence direction. And again, it's not humans does this, AI does that. It's this really integrative thing. So I think a reasonable look at the future of AI inside companies is a real expansion of what we call robotic process information to incorporate previously unautomatable things.
Yeah.
There are things that just simply make reasonable sense to expand automation to incorporate a lot more really, we're going to call them painfully automatable tasks. Um, but the real value add and differentiator will be that hybrid intelligence component and companies that figure out not just how to get their elite workers to do that, because their elite workers are figuring this out on their own.
Yeah.
But you don't have enough elite workers. We have never had enough elite workers in our workforce. The real question is, do we both societally and within our organizations figure out how to pull more people across that divide? Um,
And what do you think is going to be the role of the education system in achieving that? Because I mean, we were talking about businesses, but I mean, business would say we pay our tax. We want young people to come into the labour market equipped. So, what's the role, would you say, going
yeah.
forward of education in to equip young people to be able to do that
So
for business?
three quick answers. One is still a business answer, and it's a leadership answer. It's a thing I haven't brought up about businesses yet, which is dealing with uncertainty.
Mm.
Uh, our traditional management strategies is managers reduce uncertainty
Yeah.
and create highly reliable processes. I am now saying that that is the exact opposite of what you want to leverage hybrid intelligence. Two, clearly, given my research and the research of others, these human capital questions like curiosity, hugely predictive, for that matter, of long term life outcomes and always has been. Openness to change, for example, is one of the big five personality characteristics. It's the most predictive of exceptional life outcomes, whereas conscientiousness is sort of more generically predictive of positive life outcomes. Uh, why don't we have courses in curiosity?
Mm.
So we should and we can, and I can talk about that. And then the last um, is a technology question. Um, I'm a lover of technology in theory of what it can do. What can we do with AI itself to increase this? So, yes, 100%, there are these two very human stories about leadership and about development, including formal education. But there's also a technology question. Uh, all three of these are accessible levers. They all have significant impacts on different timescales. So let me answer your direct question first about education. Um, Here is a really interesting paper that came out a few weeks ago, or a few weeks ago. I wrote about it in my newsletter. They had young kids in a classroom, in an actual classroom, and they had a curriculum in which they rewarded interesting questions
Mm. Yeah.
rather than right answers. Simple little change. If you're offering, you don't even need to offer praise, attention. What an interesting question.
Mm.
There's a real insight there that we should talk about. So you just do that rather than who has the right answer for me, you're correct. You don't have to
But
be
but
effusive.
but Vivian, let me just pick that point up because it's a really interesting point because the whole education system, certainly in the UK, is about getting kids to give you the right answer. What you're suggesting is that the most important skill is asking the right question, if you like. How do we, I
100%.
mean, how do you make that? That's a huge shift. I
It
mean,
is a huge shift. And in
how do you
fact, my
bring that
wife and
about?
I published a paper in 2014, I believe,
Mm,
in which, long before large language models came out, we did a natural language analysis of students in an online discussion
mm,
forum. So they're just chatting with each other. We knew at week one how they would perform in the class just from those free form discussions. But the most interesting thing about that finding wasn't what distinguished the failing students from those that would pass the course. It was actually what distinguished the very best students, not just in the course, because we tracked graduation rates and job placement afterwards. So
right.
we're looking at something a little longer. What distinguished those best performing students from the passing students that were not superlative? And interestingly, the the also ran students were always right. They always gave the right answer. Um, by the way, they didn't have to. They were in a discussion forum.
Mm,
They were being scored simply on participation. You could have talked about the weather, you got full credit. But they just quoted the book. They talked about what the professor talked about in class. They were normative all the time.
yeah, yeah.
These elite students explored. And by exploring, they were regularly wrong. So there was an 30,000 MBA students, and one of the topics was collective bargaining. And the elite students, the B student in an American sense, would say auto workers do this in collective bargaining. Here's what it implies. All the stuff that was right out of the lecture. And the elite students would say, but what about nurses? And in speculating about nurses, they'd be wrong because nurses are more educated, they have stronger bargaining positions, there are different laws involved. Um, but by being wrong, they exposed their own misconcepts to themselves and thereby learned. Um, why is it that so many of those students, thousands and thousands and thousands of students, were so afraid of being wrong when
Mm,
it was the obvious path to growth,
mm.
even when it wasn't
And,
being
and
held
why would
against them in
you?
their grades?
And why would you say that's the case? I mean, that's a very interesting point. I mean, why are
So
young
some
people
of it
so worried about being
is
wrong?
some of it is deep in us. But the real question is beyond hand wavy answers like genes, what is under our control? What is changeable? And I think the story I was offering earlier, that little study where they had younger children getting praised for questions rather than answers.
Yeah.
So the punchline to that study was they then introduced new science material later. And the students in the treatment group, the one getting praised for questions, evidence more curiosity, more exploration of the material without additional prompting, a simple little causal treatment, and their whole engagement with the material changed. Um, so, one of the big Nobel Prize winning sort of breakthroughs in artificial intelligence has been the growth of deep reinforcement learning. So that's this other big technology that gave us, for example, AlphaFold. Um, well, we learned how to do reinforcement learning from studying rats solving mazes.
Right.
And I know it feels like a terrible metaphor, but when I look at elite students um, solving complex math problems, for example, what you see is effectively they're getting dopamine rewards. They're getting this reinforcement training for being wrong. It drives them because dopamine isn't a reward. Dopamine is a neuromodulatory signal about where rewards might be. So this neural circuit in their brain is driving these elite students towards where interesting, novel, rewarding things will be. And for my A students in my previous experiment, for them, being wrong meant learning. And
Mm.
that eventual learning was the thing that their brain was
Yeah.
signaling them a reward for. So if you want to build a generation, that's what we need to build into them. And the cool finding is, yes, there's a sort of loose genetic baseline, but there's a huge amount of variability that comes from our experiences. The UK education system, US, I mean, we're at best in the middle on this. You look at East Africa, China, India, their test culture is, I mean, pretty much anywhere the UK British education system touched in history is now way off the deep end. You add that into sort of a Confucian culture in China, and you have this real testy culture. And it just, once you control for the deeper human capital at play, it just doesn't predict very much about either long-term life outcomes or success with
Yeah.
using
Yeah.
AI.
Yeah. Which is pretty worrying when you think about it, isn't it? Let me ask you, we've talked a lot about the mechanics of interacting with AI. It also raises some pretty kind of scary policy issues, particularly in an environment where there is an awful lot of conflict. I mean, the right and the left in the UK just spend their lives. It's like Punch and Judy, yelling at each other, and it's pretty similar in America as far as I can see.
Yeah.
How do we? I mean, how do you? But and what you're implying is that we need to make pretty big changes to the way we educate, big changes to the way we run businesses, big changes to the way we protect our children, or robot-proof our children, to use your language. How do you shift the thinking in kind of policy terms? Because that seems to me to be the umbrella under which all the other stuff will enable it to happen. But if that doesn't change, if the debate doesn't change politically, the kind of the minutiae isn't going to change. The sort of the operationalizing of it won't change. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I 100% agree. And, you know, sometimes you have to fall back on the kind of most base but genuine arguments. Like, um, there simply is more economic gain to be
Yeah,
realized from changing this system. And no education system on this planet, no large scale formal education system is delivering grown up humans into this world that are ready. So the
no,
ones we're seeing are largely kind of by the luck of, you know, not even the genetic lottery, but just sort of the circumstantial lottery. So where does a lot of this stuff come from? Curiosity, intellectual, it comes from role modeling by parents and peers. So people that, despite the fact that elite private schools, uh, you know, engage in this same sort of give me the right answer culture, there is this context that goes beyond that. Interestingly, when you look at though the difference, there's a real interesting kind of specialized research literature on the difference between child prodigies and people who go on to change the world. And the finding is they're really completely independent groups.
right.
There are the occasional child prodigy that goes on to change the world, but kind of the odds are really low. So these kids that are hyper specialized, trained to give the right answers, do everything right, have perfect, you know, university applications and all that, they have good lives on average. But once you control for the deeper human capital there, they don't actually have better lives than you would expect for pretty much anyone of similar standing. The people that go on to change the world have much messier trajectories. They study multiple things. They don't have one passion thing, and not just study. One of my favorite actually looked at Nobel Prize winners and footballers. You know,
Right.
pure football, and most of the truly great footballers in the world, they, despite the fact that we're so obsessed with finding, you know, Lamine Yamal and all of these kids, They started playing basketball first. Um, they played other sports. They didn't really come into their own until a little later in their careers. So statistically speaking, you should be looking for them,
Yeah.
not for these 5-year-olds that somehow have this amazing ability to kick a ball. And then they took all of that model and all of that research and they looked, same thing with Nobel Prize winners.
Mm.
They were not these elite prodigies early in their career. They were generalists. They came to their field a little bit later. Um, all these qualities, but were obsessed, both as parents, but I think also as policymakers, with this idea we have to cram all of this information, all of the thing our phone does a million times better than us now. I'm a professor of neuroscience and theoretical neuroscience and at a business school. Supposedly, you can ask me questions about brains and entrepreneurship, and I have the best answers in the world. Ask this, ask Claude or GPT or Gemini. It'll give you a better, way cheaper answer
Yeah.
than what I will give you for most questions that are known, that are well posed. Why are we training our kids to compete with a thing we already know is better than us at that process? Um, so I am really worried that we're not going to change. What I am hopeful for is there are places, a large scale study of public Montessori schools in the
Right.
United States. I'm not a believer in Montessori per se, but for anyone who doesn't know about it, this is a form of education in which children are just encouraged to do whatever they want. And the teachers are there to facilitate whatever the child does and make it a learning experience. That's the thing that excites me about it, rather than some of the specific formalisms. And they found, wow, these kids have substantially better outcomes. Interestingly enough, not immediately, but later
Yeah.
when things get messy and ill-posed. So in fact, we actually have the evidence of a public school system operating in the United States that shows pronouncedly better outcomes. I again, I'm not saying the whole world should go Montessori. I actually think should experiment a little bit,
Yeah. I
try
mean,
some different things.
and that seems to me what you're suggesting is that the way to really help young people is to focus on it, curiosity and experimentation. Those are the two
My
underlying things.
son, my son, the universe decided he was going to play life on expert level from age 3, let's say. He has both type 1 diabetes and autism. And by the time he was about halfway through a really challenging experience in high school, and it's been challenging for him the whole way through. He just doesn't fit the system. He said, just let me do it on my own. I don't want to go to school anymore. Let me learn on my own. He has learned vastly more from YouTube
Yeah.
than he ever learned from school. My concern, of course, just as with the whole story I've told with AI, is if you just turn most people loose with YouTube, you will get a bunch of brain dead zombies. But this is that evidence that if you reward curiosity and exploration, he watches YouTube videos about the different kinds of infinities that exist in mathematics. That's something he finds interesting. His favorite YouTube channel right now is Behind the Bastards, a channel that explores terrible people from history to understand why they did what they
Really?
did.
Okay.
And he talks about it all of the time. He is an amazing person. He still has challenges,
Mm.
because being different, as I can attest, comes with challenges.
Yeah.
But what we need is a system probably much farther over. And and let me give you a concrete example because I have a final note on my hybrid intelligence experiment. If you recall, we had this baseline model, this small open source llama model. It wasn't very good. Better than the best human, but compared to the other AIs, it wasn't very good. It could literally run directly on your phone. Um, so I decided to make it even worse. So we trained it to never give answers. So no matter within the scope of an hour, no matter what you do, you can't prompt it into telling you the answer. And so we called it Socrates. And
Right.
let me be clear, every participant hated, they hated using Socrates. Even the cyborgy ones hated using it because sometimes you just want the answer.
Mm.
You really are ready to just move on. And it wouldn't do it. What would the price of oil be in 6 months? Well, that's a really interesting question. If you wanted to answer questions like this, you should probably ask yourself the following things and maybe read this paper and you should think about these. It really made people unhappy. It had the highest average hybrid intelligence. The dumbest model, it did by definition, it failed every benchmark. It couldn't make predictions about the future because it wouldn't give answers. So, by our traditional benchmarks of AI, Socrates is as bad as you can be, but it had the highest average hybrid intelligence because more than twice as many of our participants switched into cyborg mode.
Mm.
Now, the reality is, whether we're talking about YouTube or agentic AIs or any kind of technology brought in from a sort of education perspective or future of work or even just daily well-being, is it can't be Socrates. People really don't like using it. Um, but there's somewhere in between giving you everything you want all the time as soon as you want it, maybe even before you ask for it, and only ever giving you what you need. Somewhere in between there
Mm.
is the sweet spot where you're getting challenged all the time, just outside your comfort zone, but only when you're ready for it. You get the answers when the answers are
Yeah.
fine, and you get challenged. And so you're not just getting the next 30-second YouTube video, you're getting the difference between Aleph and Aleph Prime in the family of infinities because right in that moment, you were ready to stretch. That's what the AI tutor that Sam Altman should have been pitching at Congress is. But it's not GPT because it doesn't matter
Right.
really what you
Um,
do.
yeah.
GPT will give the students the answer and then they never learn. And, we can see that in Anthropic's own research with Claude Code and developers is similar to my data. It doesn't hurt all developers, but a substantial
Yeah.
population of them switch into automator mode and they literally get worse at coding.
Yeah.
And that's deeply, deeply worrying. So that's, we've talked about education and the fact that there are concrete examples of policy shifts that already exist in the world, and we could be incorporating into UK, US,
Mm.
China, for that matter, education policy. Um, we've talked about a technology shift. You can build models
Yeah.
that actually
Yeah.
make us better. Um, and then, to come full circle back to leadership again, I have made the argument here, if you really dig under it, that the unique value add is our ability to explore the unknown, to deal with genuine uncertainty. And
Yeah.
yet, all of traditional management is about managing away
That's right.
uncertainty.
Yeah. So it's a big challenge that you've set out there. Vivian, thank you for taking a bit of time to talk us through the work that you've been doing in the book and some of the ideas. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating, and whichever way things turn out, I mean, I think it's going to be an interesting few years going forward. So thank you for kind of setting out a lot of the issues that people need to think about. I mean, that's actually really, really important. And I know you're going to be doing more research into this area. So good luck going forward. And I mean, Robot Proof's a great book. I'm looking forward already to the next one.
I I I know you can see the posters behind me. Almost certainly the next one will be Small Sacrifices. And if it's an interesting tease to everyone, think about what a mad scientist would do to explore the science, economics, and story of purpose. And that's what that next book will be about, and some core experiments I've run in that space. And wow, in this moment in which we're at each other's throat,
Mm.
what does it mean to really truly be the best version of yourself? And why is it we are so rarely that?
Yeah. Come back on the show and talk about it when you've written it. I look forward to that.
100%.
Thanks, Vivian. See you soon.
Cheers.
Bye bye.